Hello, my friends, and welcome to Wandering Wednesday from the Curate Study. Only this Wandering Wednesday is more actually of a thoughtful Thursday because we're slightly behind the times with it due to various other things. We haven't recorded it early enough to get it up on Wednesday, so it's probably going to go out on Thursday instead. But hey, does it really matter? And today we're continuing the series looking at what is the Bible. Last week, if you care to scroll back, you will see that we talked about the Old Testament. And this is the second bit of the Bible we're talking about today. Because remember, the Bible is not really one book. In fact, it's 66 books. And the New Testament is the sort of the second bit with the 20, well, not actually half really, of course, because the New Testament is 27 books. So it's just under half of the whole of the Bible. So how do we get those books? Well, roughly speaking, the New Testament is concerned, of course, with Jesus and the development of the early church after Jesus' death and resurrection. And the earliest complete list of the 27 books of the New Testament is found in a document written by a chap called Athanasius, or I think I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, a 4th century bishop of Alexandria, and it's dated 367 AD, so a very, very long time ago, but actually quite a long time after Jesus lived, about 340-ish years after Jesus lived. But that's the first list we have of the books that we consider to be the modern New Testament. Now, there's no real consensus among scholars as to the date of the composition of the New Testament texts. So opinions range from sometime before 70 AD, so that's about 40 years after Jesus died, to later, maybe as late as 115 AD. So the two bands, as I say, are between about 40 years after Jesus died to about 80 years after Jesus died. But there is a technique called literary criticism, or literary analysis rather, and when that's performed, looking at the styles of writing, the words that are used, and various other very technical aspects of written language, this can be used to date the New Testament books. And the earliest of them would be dated, according to this technique, to the mid to late 1st century AD. And the earliest works, which seem to be the letters of the Apostle Paul, for example, something like 1 Thessalonians, was written probably around 52 AD, so less than 20 years after Jesus died. But it is a complicated business and scholars don't exactly agree. However, the first time there is reference made to the books of the New Testaments is in another book by a scholar called Irenaeus of Lyons. And he quotes from most of the books in the New Testament in his book called Against Heresies, which was written around 180 AD. So whatever happened, we know that most of the books of the New Testament were compiled at the very latest by that point. But as I say, scholars who practice this technique of literary analysis, or many of them, would argue they were produced far, far earlier. Paul's letter, for example, about 52 AD. And there are a number of other documents by contemporary Christian writers who reference those New Testament texts during the 2nd century AD. Now, the books of the New Testament were nearly all written by Jewish Christians who lived in the Roman Empire. That is, men who were Jews but had converted to or began to follow Jesus. And of course, they were all written under Roman occupation. The one notable exception is probably the writer Luke, who wrote both the Gospel of Luke and the Book of Acts. And although opinion is divided as to whether he was a Gentile, a non-Jew, or a Hellenistic Jew, a Jew of Greek origin. The actual identity of the authors, of course, is quite contentious, because it is often taught that the Gospel writers themselves, for example, were all eyewitnesses to Jesus' life and ministry. But a great many scholars would disagree, and some would argue that the names we currently ascribe to the authors were a later addition. To make up your own mind about that, of course. Now, it's very easy to imagine that the Bible that we use in the Anglican Church is the definitive version of the Bible. And there are all kinds of different views on which is the best version to get. I don't know how many different versions there are, but certainly dozens, possibly hundreds. From the King James, which is extremely popular with many Christians still today, right through to modern message style versions, which have a far more contemporary type of English language in them. But of course, our New Testament and our Bible in general does differ between some ecclesiastical traditions. So there will be different denominations of Christianity who will have a slightly different version of the Bible. The books may, for example, be in a different order, or there may be additional works like the Apocrypha, which we talked about a little while ago, in there. So how reliable is the Bible? How many and what is the age of the texts that we have that give us the written works that we currently have in our Bible, and where did they come from? Well, if you want to find out that, you have to wait till next week's Wondering Wednesday, which hopefully will be up on Wednesday rather than on Thursday. I hope you found that useful. The Bible is a remarkable book. As I mentioned, I think last week, it has been foundational, not only in our thinking in much of the West, but also in things like language and even with its influence on science. So I really encourage you to read the Bible, because it's astonishing how many Christians don't know their Bibles very well at all. So if you really want to broaden your faith and your understanding of this great literary text, dig into it and read a bit more about it. Either way, I hope you've enjoyed this week, and until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. God bless.